Friends is often called one of the greatest TV shows of all time. A sitcom that defined the 1990s and still lives on through reruns, streaming platforms, and memes all over the internet. For 10 seasons, audiences followed the personal and professional ups and downs of Phoebe, Chandler, Monica, Joey, Rachel, and Ross. They went through breakups, marriages, divorces, career changes, failures, and victories, all while sticking together as a close-knit group of friends. But while fans adored the comedy, the characters, and the iconic Central Perk moments, one thing always bugged them. How on earth could these young New Yorkers afford such huge and well-located apartments in Manhattan? After all, if you know anything about New York rent, you know those places cost a fortune. The main settings of the show were Monica's purple apartment and Joey and Chandler's place across the hall. These apartments became as iconic as the characters themselves, practically characters in their own right. But fans who re-watched the show multiple times started asking the obvious question. How could they possibly afford those places on their jobs? Surprisingly, Friends did quietly explain it. Though not everyone caught the details, let's start with Monica and Rachel. Before Rachel moved in during the pilot episode, Monica was already living there. Monica's job as a chef wasn't very stable in the early seasons, and Rachel started out working as a waitress at Central Perk, which definitely wouldn't cover that massive apartment. But the writers gave us an explanation. Monica's grandmother was the original tenant, and Monica inherited the apartment through an illegal sublet. On top of that, the apartment was rent-controlled, meaning the rent stayed much lower than the market price, making it somewhat believable that Monica and Rachel could live there even when their jobs weren't great. Across the hall, things looked a little different. Chandler and Joey's apartment was smaller, but still not cheap by New York standards. Chandler worked in statistical analysis and data reconfiguration, a boring corporate job that paid really well, even though his friends barely understood what he actually did. His salary made it possible for him to cover most of the rent and expenses. Joey, on the other hand, was a struggling actor who spent most of the show auditioning, getting rejected, or picking up small gigs. He wouldn't have been able to afford the apartment on his own, but thanks to Chandler's financial stability, Joey got to stay there comfortably while chasing his acting dreams. Then we have Ross, the paleontologist. His job as a professor and researcher paid him decently, and Ross was smart with money. Unlike Monica, he didn't blow through his savings, and his lifestyle was a little more grounded. So for Ross, affording his place was never really questioned too much. Phoebe's situation was also quietly explained. She lived in her grandmother's old apartment, which was also rent-controlled, allowing her to manage living in New York even when her income came from massage therapy or random odd jobs. So technically, the show gave fans explanations for why the characters lived in such nice places. But here's where it gets funny. Even though the apartments themselves were explained, their overall lifestyles were still way too glamorous for their supposed incomes. Joey, for example, was constantly broke as an actor, yet somehow managed to always buy mountains of pizza, sandwiches, and junk food. Phoebe's quirky jobs didn't really guarantee steady paychecks either, yet she lived comfortably enough to spend time hanging out at Central Perk instead of stressing over bills as the seasons went on. Some character situations became more realistic. Rachel moved up from being a waitress to building a career in the fashion industry, and Monica eventually became a head chef, which would definitely pay more. Chandler switched careers from data reconfiguration to advertising, which kept his high salary consistent. In those later years, it made sense that they could afford their lives. But in the early days, it was a stretch of imagination that only sitcom magic could explain. And yet, that's the thing about Friends. The show wasn't about real estate or money problems. It was about 6 people trying to figure out life together. The apartments, especially Monica's purple one, became a central hub where laughter, fights, makeups, and unforgettable moments happened. The unrealistic rent didn't ruin the story. If anything, it gave the characters a cozy, familiar backdrop that fans came to love. So yes, Friends did silently fix the biggest fan complaint by sprinkling in explanations about rent-controlled apartments and Chandler's high-paying job. But it didn't always add up when you looked closely. Still, fans didn't really mind. The heart of the show was never about who paid the rent. It was about the friendships that made that apartment feel like home. And maybe that's why, decades later, Friends still works. Because while the money might not make sense, The bond between the characters was priceless.